Meiko Takayama. I am the founder and CEO of AWE. And so I'm so incredibly excited to be speaking to you today about the topic of supply chain diversity. So who are we at AWE? If you've never been to one of our sessions before, we are an enterprise solutions company. We help companies do what we've coined, create sustainable workplace cultures. And we do that by helping to embed DEI throughout the organization. So as a women-owned and minority-owned company, I am incredibly excited about the conversation today. I actually just had the chance to share with one of our panelists, Jackie Sturm, who I will get the chance to introduce to you shortly, that the reason why we became a women-owned certified company was because of Intel. There was somebody on Jackie's team who said and really encouraged us to become a women-owned certified company. And they were very, very persistent, which was amazing. This is exactly what we needed to hear of, please get certified and please ensure that you're certified as an organization. And so Jackie, thank you to your organization in helping us through that journey. The reason why we're so excited about the conversation around supply chain diversity, though, is that when a lot of organizations and a lot of people, even outside of the DEI space, think about the concept of DEI, we think of it as a human capital issue. We think of it as recruiting, retention, development, promotion. And we oftentimes don't think of the concept of DEI as it really speaks to the business overall. So the opportunity that we have today is to actually talk about how DEI can be impacted through the supply chain. And so, because as you look at supply chain diversity, you're looking at really broadening innovation, you're looking at driving competition, you're looking at providing socioeconomic impact to the proprietors of these organizations and the communities that they actually serve. So when we actually look at supply chain diversity, recognize that there is an opportunity for economic impact in an underrepresented community. Before we begin, I always love to start with some statistics. And so I'm going to share with you a little bit of the statistics and information around supplier diversity. So first off, what is supplier diversity? Simply put, supplier diversity is a supply chain that incorporates businesses owned by diverse individuals or groups. So then your question might be, so what constitutes a diverse individual or group? So what constitutes a diverse individual or group is a business that is at least 51% owned by an underrepresented or underserved group. So the common classifications may include minority-owned enterprises, women-owned enterprises, LGBTQ, veterans, and proprietors with disabilities. There are a number of different councils that actually provide certification. So when I mean councils, I mean groups like WeBank, which is Women's Business Enterprise National Council. There are organizations like NMSDC, which stands for National Minority Supplier Development Council, and NGLCC, which is the National LGBTQ Chamber of Commerce. So these organizations provide certification, and the certification is something that is really varied in complexity depending on which group that you're trying to get certified with, and there is recertification that is necessary year over year. So that is what a supplier diversity looks like and what a diverse supplier looks like. Now, on the function front, we also wanted to actually talk a little bit about the function of supply chain, because according to Gartner's 2021 survey, 41% of supply chain positions are filled by women. And in the executive positions, this share drops to 17%. So we're going to actually just touch upon that a little bit at the end, but we're so incredibly honored to have at least some of the representatives from that 17% on the conversation with us today. So let's go ahead and I will do some panelist introductions. First off, I'd love to introduce Jackie Sturm. So Jackie is the Corporate Vice President, Global Supply Chain Operations at Intel. She leads operations for their multi-billion-dollar global supply chain and is often cited as the number 10, as one of the top 10 Gartner supply chain top 25 year over year for the past 10 years. Her team supports construction and facilities sourcing, indirect procurement, supply chain systems and analytics, and supply chain environmental and social governance programs. And in fact, she's going to actually talk a little bit about some of the work that Intel's done on conflict minerals later on. Prior to joining supply chain, Jackie held various finance positions at Intel, including the CFO for technology and manufacturing, as well as working at HP, Ridge Computer, and Apple. Welcome, Jackie. So incredibly honored to be partnering with you today.
Oh, thank you so much, Meiko. It is really an honor, and it's been my pleasure for years to be working with AWE. And I so admire the work that you have personally fostered, as well as the work that the group and all of its affiliates have delivered.
Also introducing you to Eileen Basom. Eileen is the CEO of supplier.io, which is the global leader in supplier diversity solutions. And we actually go back a number of years because we're so honored to actually have partnered with Eileen as an executive through our All Leader program in her prior roles in the high-tech industry. And we were so excited to learn that Eileen then became the CEO of this amazing organization that helps companies track diverse supplier spend and helps to grow these companies and measures through inclusion tracker and economic impact reports. And so on top of that, Eileen has been selected as a top 50 most powerful women in tech in 2020 and 2021. And I'm sure that that will continue. So thank you so much for joining us today in this new capacity as the CEO of supplier.io.
That's very kind, Meiko. Thank you so much for having me on this panel and discussing this very important topic. It's certainly an honor. Just like you said, we've been partnered for a long time with AWE, and just congratulations and big thank you to you as well as AWE for really the important work that you have been doing to advance more women executives. So really, really appreciate it and glad to be a part of this panel. Thank you.
Thank you. And then we have Tiffany Keaton. So I have to give Tiffany a shout out because Tiffany's name came up at a dinner that I hosted in London a few weeks ago, where one of the executives at the dinner said, "You need to know Tiffany. You need to know her because of the work that she's doing. She is amazing." And so immediately I emailed her saying, please join us on this panel that we're having today. Tiffany Keaton is the Senior Manager and Head of Business Diversity and Supply Chain Sustainability at TIAA, where she leads a team responsible for developing and engaging certified diverse suppliers. She does this not only across the US, but also across the globe in India and UK. And we're going to hear a little bit more about one of the areas that she's really focused around, which is how to progress the company's global procurement human rights initiative by educating vendors and revising contracts to include language on inclusivity and supply chain sustainability. So welcome today to this panel, Tiffany.
Thanks, Meiko. Thank you so much.
So excited to hear about the work that you've done and that you see our friend Beverly Phillip. So Bev is AWE's Senior Director of Content and Delivery, and she's going to be actually coming back on later on during the Q&A. So if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to actually put them into chat. She's going to be compiling the questions, and then we'll be actually coming back on and leading the Q&A at the end. So thank you, Bev, and see you soon. Let's go ahead and get started. So I want to start by asking Jackie, if you could please start by sharing with us a little bit about this diversity supply chain experience and programming that you have at Intel.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So as a backdrop, my team is about 1,200 supply chain professionals and technologists, data scientists, and we cover all manner of strategic sourcing. The overall spends under management at Intel are about $46 billion. Now, of that $46 billion, a substantial amount is going to large multinational public companies. And so, that has traditionally been our focus in sourcing. And that has limited opportunities, obviously, for underrepresented groups to be a part of our supply chain. But back in 2015, at the very beginning of the year, we began our supplier diversity program as a center-led drive so that we could create not just more focus on supplier diversity at Intel, but also across the tech industry. And since that time, we've achieved a 10x increase since 2015 in that spending by applying a broad-based program that allows us to leverage industry associations where we fostered diversity working groups in those areas. We leverage our tier 1 supply base, those large multinational companies who are public companies, to ensure that their tier 2s and tier 3s are actively sourcing diverse suppliers. And we're also developing and showcasing internally more diverse supplier candidates so that they will be familiar to our partners. And then in our selections, we're incorporating diversity expectations so that we anticipate that every selection will showcase at least one diverse supplier. And then we measure the performance of the diverse suppliers that are selected so that we can showcase their competence to our partners who sometimes are reluctant to shift suppliers. They've got an incumbent that they're happy with. So we do showcase the performance. And our program has really been helpful in illustrating the value that these diverse suppliers can bring to our business. They are smart, they're capable, but they're also very hungry to grow their businesses and to show what they can do. Through some of these arrangements, we've been able to successfully debunk a longstanding myth that existed in our company, and I think is not uncommon, that fostering diverse suppliers is charity. And instead, we're leveraging this great resource of our 10x diverse supply base to show that we are, in fact, adding new capabilities to our existing supply base. And in many cases, we are giving the incumbents a run for the money. And about 80% of the time, the new diverse suppliers are actually outperforming their prior incumbent supply base. So this is our program. It's very deeply engaged. We, as I say, center lead it, but it spans the company. And we also do a lot of outreach to go across the technology industry to share best methods, to share information about great suppliers, and also to enlist more suppliers who qualify, as I did, to become a diverse supplier and get certified. In addition, I care not just about supplier diversity, but also our own internal organization. I'm the executive sponsor for our Supply Chain Diversity and Inclusion Council, as well as the executive sponsor for our African Americans Advancing Intel's Supply Chain. And that group is a wonderful community for our Black population. I serve on the advisory board for Howard University Supply Chain Management, as well as the WeBank board. So this is deeply important to me, and I think our program is really improving our understanding of what diverse suppliers can do.
Thank you, Jackie. You have set the bar high for us because now everyone hears the 10x and thinks, okay, is that what our goal is? And maybe it is what our goal is. I do actually have a quick follow-up question that I'd like to ask you before we move on to the intro to Tiffany and finding out more about her story and the work that she's done at TIAA. One of the things that you mentioned was you said, so you work with tier 1 companies to help support their tier 2 and 3 suppliers, right? So in that role, you are really acting as kind of the influencer, right? You're trying to kind of influence what they're actually doing. How do you actually do that?
Well, we expect them to deliver at least a certain percentage of diverse suppliers in their tier 2s. They report it directly to us in their report card performance so that we can understand whether they are taking adequate action. And so, many of our large equipment manufacturers, they use people who fabricate spares. They may have material sourcing, they may have design engineering, because we do want our diverse suppliers to be in the STEM ranks and not just in the the janitorial or the very low end. We want people to be moved up in the strata through the work that they do. So we encourage our tier 1s to do this, but we actually set an expectation that they will be measured against a certain percentage performance. And, we are building a huge new facility, a factory in Ohio, and we're looking at a 20% diverse supplier performance in the initial construction, which will be a multi-billion-dollar activity.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that insight.
Uh-huh.
Next, Tiffany, would love if you could please share with us your diversity supply chain experience and story.
So much, Meiko. So I have a unique origin or genesis story in that I did not start in supplier diversity originally. I have been an entrepreneur since 1992, and once led to TIAA, there was this role available called supplier diversity. I said, well, I've been advocating for Black women entrepreneurs my entire life. How could this be outside of my realm of experience? With the exception that I had never done anything in sourcing. So I applied for the job and I got it. I've been managing the program now since 2018. We expanded to business diversity just now in 2022, inclusive of supply chain sustainability. This is not a new effort. I think it's just newly formalized. Supplier diversity has been in place at TIAA since 1992, but it was very spend focused. It then expanded very much like Intel's program, as Jackie was describing, to include a tier 2 program. We have a diverse supplier academy for business development where we offer mentorship, scholarships, webinars, etc., to ensure that our diverse suppliers have what they need in order to continue to grow and scale. Yet we also seek to debunk a myth, not the same as Intel's, but that just because it's a diverse business, that it is a small business. We know that that is not necessarily true. Just because it is diverse does not mean that it is small. There are several large, ethnically diverse, LGBTQ owned, disabled and veteran-owned firms and women-owned firms that definitely scale out of small business. I would say that my job description falls in line with leading, growing, and driving and advocating. I get now to lead a small but mighty team of supplier diversity professionals, now business diversity at TIAA. It has always been, as I'm sure many of the attendees here today can attest to, has always been a job for one person for the entire enterprise. And our CEO and our executive team knew that in order for us to grow this program and expand it the way we saw it, we envisioned it, it was going to require more than just one person. And so now we have a small and powerful team. Expanding the program from what it was in 2018, which was great under Melissa St. Clair, I was reporting directly to her. It was time to take it to another level. We want to go from best in class to world class. When you look at the 5 levels of a supply diversity program, the goal is always world class, the top of the mountain. We also need to drive those bold outcomes. It is not enough, as our CEO has made very clear, it is not enough to just stay competitive. Set the bar, right? Set the expectation to have others meet it. And lastly, advocating for greater diverse vendor inclusion is by far my most important job. Thanks, Meiko.
Thank you, Tiffany. And again, we'll be following up with some of the questions that I have after we have Eileen introduce. If you could please share with us a little bit about supplier.io's role and how you've supported companies in creating a more diverse supply chain.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Meiko. So you've already mentioned supplier.io is the leading supplier diversity management platform. But what I would focusing on is our mission is to help companies increase their diverse supplier spend. That is a very important mission. My personal kind of the background is both the diversity in organizations, obviously in workforce, as well as diversity in supply chain is very close to my heart and a very, very important missions for me individually, as well as now the organization that I'm a part of is what we do day in and out. How do we do that? So there's a couple of things that we do. One, we start by helping companies determine their baseline in their diversity spend. You have to know where you stand, or where you start with, obviously, which is, again, a starting point for both setting the goals as well as creating that strategy. So both Tiffany and Jackie talked about kind of their programs that they have, and they have an amazing programs, which is fantastic. It's extremely important to, again, knowing where to start and what is the baseline before you set your goals. The next part is we have the largest, most accurate, comprehensive database of certified diverse suppliers. And why that's important is all our customers, as well as, Tiffany and Jackie will talk about more too, is it's very important for the sourcing group to be able to find and have access to these diverse suppliers. So we provide that search engine. And so I call it, we take the excuse away of, what, I don't know where to find them, or I don't know, where they are for the specific area that I'm looking for. No, we actually have that database, and they have capability to search within that and to find those diverse suppliers. The other way that we help, I think that is extremely important for anyone that is both in the managing the diversity within supply chain as well, running the program, or starting brand new, you have to really make sure that you have the tools to be able to measure and manage every facet of your program, from tier 1 spend analytics, which Jackie talked a little bit about, to goal tracking, to inclusion of those diverse suppliers and sourcing events. Jackie talked about how Intel does give specific goals. So how is the organization standing against those goals? But also even the one level down of that is that actually tracking the diversity spend on specifically also workforce diversity statistics of those key suppliers. So not only doing tier 2, right, and doing kind of reporting, but actually really looking at those workforce diversity, within those key suppliers are things that we actually help with. In addition, Meiko, in the earlier kind of in the discussion, you mentioned about economic impact. So that's extremely important. It's measuring the impact of the supplier diversity program. And we help organizations with kind of that kind of analysis. How is that impacting on the larger US economy, which is very, very important, right? Whether that's creating jobs and wages and, the impact on the taxes and other things and GDP. And then the last but not least, one of the big things that we're working on that is extremely important is benchmarking. We'll talk, of course, in detail more, but as you're setting up goals, it's wonderful to know what your baseline is. But then it's as you grow your program, you need to know how you're standing against your industry, and being able to have that kind of a benchmarking data is extremely important. So that's kind of how we work with the organizations and help creating more diverse supply chain for companies.
Thank you, Eileen. And again, we'd love to get some insight as we go through the questions around some best practices that you've actually seen and best in class. But you bring up a really great point around this concept of metrics. So I'd love to actually go a little bit deeper into metrics. Jackie, could you share with us, you shared with us a little bit about some of the metrics that you're actually measuring, but from a success perspective, what are some of the metrics that other companies should be focused on when they look at the success of their supply chain diversity program?
Well, I think they should set goals first off. If they have a baseline and they can measure what that spending is like, they should also be looking at what is the composition of that diverse population. Are they strong on women but low on other underrepresented minorities? They should understand that and presumably set goals at those subcategories as well. Do they want to have an increase in African American, Hispanic, veteran, LGBTQ, women-owned businesses? So I think you need to dissect it and understand your baseline, and then set goals that say, where you're going to go holistically, but also in those subcategories. Then I think you need to look at the number of the average number of diverse suppliers that are being included in selections. Is that sufficient or on the path to supporting the business goal that they've set to achieve their longer term number? And then you need to look at their performance. How are they doing relative to their category competitors? And if they're not being selected, are you providing them the after action that gives feedback on what led to their failure to win that bid, so that potentially they can be successful in the future? Those are some of the metrics that I look at. And then I also look across commodities to make sure that there's broad-based commodity team engagement rather than all in the indirect space. For us as a business, we want it to be broad-based rather than marketing, publications, and IT support. So making sure that the engineering teams have goals, and they may be related to availability. But we've heard, I think all of us for decades, there simply aren't any diverse suppliers who can perform this function. Okay, let's actually get some data, and where people are failing, let's help them become more successful. So those are a few of the things I would look at.
Thank you. And Jackie, you mentioned at the very beginning, you have in essence this, what I think could be termed as kind of the Rooney Rule within supplier diversity, where you have one diverse supplier that needs to come to the table for each of the bids. So that is one out of how many is that typical number?
It does depend. It might be 1 out of 3. If it's an RFI, it might be 1 out of 7. It depends on the category. But in large part, I would say 3, 4, 5 would be the maximum.
Great. So you're looking at about a 25, potentially 20 to 25% representation for each potential bid.
Yes, and I'm hypothesizing right now about those numbers, but I think that would be a rough order.
Great. And what I see as a consistent message here is that we can't have teams rely upon, well, we don't know how to find these people or these organizations, because that sounds to me like that may be some of the pushback that you're getting from your internal clients. Tiffany, you're nodding.
I think that has historically been the challenge. There's 2 challenges. One, I love my incumbent. Why would I ever get rid of my incumbent? And we know that from a broader supply chain standpoint, we want to mix it up a little bit more anyway, so that the incumbent doesn't get too entrenched. So they love their incumbent, or, well, there's really no diverse supplier that can do what I'm asking for. That might be the case. They might be doing something that is extremely arcane, and yet there might be somebody who's ready to try. And so we have to also help develop those suppliers, which may be why someone like you, Meiko, was receiving so many calls from our team to say, please get certified, please do this. We'll work with those who we think might be capable, as well as try to develop those who are nascent in an area that we think is an opportunity.
Great. Tiffany, you were nodding your head because you said the whole question around how to, like, the pushback that you might get.
Oh, yes. We completely put the flame out of the excuses when we brought on supplier.io's Supplier Explorer tool. And it comes with unlimited licenses. So anyone in the organization can find a diverse supplier. Now, when it comes to those areas that Jackie is talking about, those categories or those industries where there are few to no diverse suppliers, I think it is key that we as representatives of large corporations, as well as the national certifying agencies like NGLCC and WeBank and NMSDC, share that broadly, communicate that here are the industries where there is the big 3 or the big 4, and all of these companies are using them. All these large corporations are using them. When are you going to get yourself in that door? How are you going to get a seat to that table? When are you going to expand your capabilities to compete in this area? Now, chances are they'll probably get into that space and be acquired, but that's a win too. Mm-hmm. I do think, though, too often we hear the excuses, I can't find one, or there are no suppliers in this space. And it's really because as an entrepreneur, I didn't know that this space was full game for me. I didn't know that it was an opportunity that I should pursue. I didn't know that there was no one who looked like me, came from my background, had the capabilities in that space, and that it might be a fight worth getting into. Didn't know. It would be our responsibility as the corporations and those national certifying bodies. And even I would challenge the incredible blog at supplier.io to speak on that, because whenever you search supplier diversity, supplier.io comes up first. So they have the attention of all of those people who are searching, what is supplier diversity? How do I get into it? How do I build a program? How can I be most effective? It might be worth a blog post, but we don't know what we don't know.
Thank you. And you make a really good point, Tiffany, which is that it is part of the education, not only of the supplier diversity teams, but of the entrepreneurs and the proprietors themselves around how to utilize and manage and partner. Because I think that that is, like, as a small business owner myself, it is something that is not something that I viewed initially as being a priority, because it felt like, gosh, there's so many other things I need to focus on, and rather than seeing this is actually a competitive advantage for us, and we should actually be using this truly to our advantage. And so thank you so much for bringing that perspective, both as an entrepreneur and as an in-house supply chain executive. Eileen, one of the questions that has come up has been around the concept of incumbent. And because I do think that that is a challenge that comes up with a lot of individuals. How do you convince the internal partner, or if it's a tier 2, to actually move beyond their incumbent? What are some of the best practices that you've actually seen?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things. One is from the best practice perspective, really the customers that we're working with, or they might be in completely different places in their journey, so the challenges might be different. So I'm going to kind of look at different ways. One of them is what we see so much around that is that it has to be a program that you have to have a really, really good buy-in from the top of the organization. That makes a huge difference. So it's not just the supplier diversity, a manager is actually leading this effort, but it is an organizational commitment to this, and it makes very much a big difference. And then the other thing that I will say is that Tiffany made a made a comment earlier, was about kind of building the team, and so what we see is that for actually programs to be successful, you have to really have the staffing as well as the that buy-in, definitely to be able to be successful. So I always say that you need to have the budget, you have to have the staffing to be able to really support that program. Earlier, also, Jackie mentioned that, it's all about also making sure that, there is a diverse, suppliers, even though you love, the vendor that you're working with, it's all about really explaining them the value. So we do these state of supplier diversity reporting every year, and we literally survey and talk with so many organizations across industries to get this data. And one of the things that we saw that is actually really good is that supplier diversity is much more norm than it has ever been, which is a good news. Than it's been the last 3 to 5 years. It used to be all about compliance, and now it's more around employee values and corporate values and supply chain competitiveness, that what Jackie was talking about earlier. So being able to really articulate the benefits of this and making sure that you, again, have the buy-in from top down makes a big difference. My big thing also is we do more and more see from the companies becoming more common, where that companies are seeking or giving preference to suppliers that share their values, and in a wide range of things, from sustainability to labor laws to climate change, and also obviously around diversity and inclusion. And so, speaking of tier 2 programs that you just mentioned, what we're seeing is, companies are asking their suppliers to subcontract with diverse businesses. And this is becoming more of kind of a almost a demand versus kind of a nice to have. Now we have over 6,500 suppliers that report this information to their customers every quarter. So this is becoming, again, a lot more common, much more best practice that we're seeing across. Another thing that I will tell you is that definitely we've seen an incredible growth in that, in the tier 2 program and reportings around it. It grew 3 times in the past 2 years. So we definitely see a trend that, again, it's getting more accepted and it's becoming, again, more best practice. The last part that I would say is many customers are also started requesting workforce diversity information that I was talking about earlier. With the potential new kind of the regulations around the ESG reporting coming in soon, which includes diversity disclosures, it's definitely, we're seeing the trends that companies have to seek out suppliers that align with their both customers as well as their own values, and they're going to have to do a lot more reporting around that. So we certainly, like I said, it's all about getting the buy-in and being able to communicate both the value and need, within the organization.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that insight, Eileen. We do have a number of questions that are coming up, so we're just going to finish this next portion so that we can address a number of the questions that have been raised within the chat. So thank you for everybody that's including questions. Eileen, you brought up a really interesting point around the concept of values. And I think that, Jackie, the work that you've done around conflict minerals and is actually really at the forefront of understanding what are the values of the organization and does that actually pertain and align with what our supply chain looks like. So can you just share with us a high level of the work that you've done around removing conflict minerals from your supply chain?
Yes, I'd be thrilled to. And I do want to say, just in general, at Intel, we have had it as one of our corporate values forever, 54 years, that we will be a great corporate citizen wherever we operate, wherever we get our supply, wherever our extended supply chain operates. And recently, maybe 3-4 years ago, we encapsulated that into a crisper corporate purpose, which is that we will deliver the leadership technology and will improve the lives of every person on Earth. And those people are in all walks of life. Those might be miners, factory workers, janitors, executives, and they don't ever have to buy a PC. But as we started to think about this particular issue, conflict minerals that you raised, this came to the forefront of our awareness back in 2009 when an NGO called the Enough Project educated us about the terrible situation that artisanal miners faced in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Those were miners of materials that are used by electronics, tantalum, tin, tungsten, and gold, and they were being targeted by armed insurgents who were systematically and very brutally exploiting this mining population so that they could commandeer the profits from their work. And once we understood this, it was a terrible moment. And at the most senior levels, we agreed that in no way was Intel going to allow our business to finance this civilian abuse and reward the abusers for it. But frankly, we didn't know what we could do. And yet, I think we all know what happens when supply chains face impossible challenges, right? We just figure it out. We go into problem solving. So our actions were triggered first to seek to understand. And that seeking involved traveling over 250,000 miles by my team to walk the flow from the point of origination at the mine and all the way through to the last point of differentiation at the smelter to understand what was the process and how was the exploitation taking the profits out of the hands of the artisanal miners. We considered, we could leave Africa or at least the DRC and go source these minerals elsewhere. But we also knew that those artisanal miners lived or died based on the profits that they were able to make of several dollars a day. And So, we needed to understand the situation and determine how we could impact it. On top of that, we're not direct buyers. We didn't have any experience in Africa. We knew nothing about mining. So, a kind of a trifecta of ignorance that, confronted us. But the process was very illuminating. And because we are an engineering company, people like to get to root cause. They like to get to how could you address this issue, bringing hypotheses into the forefront. And so by doing all of this analysis, and our team is comprised of chemical engineers and people who work business process, we worked with the State Department, we worked with the OECD, we worked with the NGO. And what we ultimately did is we said, we can create a chain of custody with a mass balance bag and tag process that ensures that material can come from a legitimate miner and go all the way to the smelter if we can control this chain of custody. And so we set a process in place. We worked with the Responsible Business Alliance to institute it because we chair one of those working groups. And then we worked closely with the smelters themselves to say, please, smelter, don't accept material that does not come through this structured chain of custody model. And the smelters had no obligation to us either. We had no connection with them. And so this was an experience of influencing and educating and helping people understand the dire conditions that faced these people, the civilians who were exploited. And I just want to tell you, by 2012, we were able to eliminate all conflict tantalum in our microprocessors. And that took us 3 years to get there. And the next year, we eliminated conflict minerals of all the remaining tungsten, tin, and gold. And through some data that we analyzed, we were able to take 46% that first year, 46% of the economic benefit out of those insurgents' hands by controlling the movement of tantalum alone. And that has continued with the other minerals. It's something that makes me proud. And even today, we are consulted with by the governments of Rwanda and the DRC on how to further improve mining. And we have an overall focus in the company on responsible minerals that will expand to cobalt, as well as many other minerals that need to have our attention. I know it wasn't too brief, Meiko, but hopefully that encapsulated it.
No, it is the ultimate story of how to influence your tier twos, right? It is the ability to be able to actually enact change within the organization, within your supply chain, and particularly tier ones, but then ultimately to literally change kind of the world and change countries. So not to put that out that every supply chain organization needs to actually be doing this, but again, what we're looking at are ways in which organizations have been able to look at the values of the organization, the ethos of the organization, and actually embed it throughout. Now, one final question, Tiffany, is for you before I ask this is the penultimate question, is you talked about how you revise contracts to include language on inclusivity and supply chain sustainability. So can you share with us just very quickly what that looks like?
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, first, it was a matter of benchmarking and doing some benchmarking and peer-to-peer learning. We did some internal collaborations across the sourcing department, the inclusion and diversity and equity department, as well as legal ethics and compliance. And then started to draft new contract language that supported the SDGs, as well as refining as we continue to evolve the program, tier 1 and tier 2, supplier diversity language, and set those ESG expectations for our suppliers. That is the quick and skinny version.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that insight. So, so one final question for everybody is just in like literally one sentence, for any organization that is at the nascent stages of creating their supply chain diversity program, what is the one thing that they should be thinking of? Eileen, if we can start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe in this, and anything that I do is that what gets measured gets done. So with all the studies that we've done, we've saw 73% of companies that set supplier diversity goals measures success, typically quarterly or monthly, which is going to allow you to really have a clear line of sight of areas of both improvement and, obviously help drive better alignment with sourcing.
Great. Thank you. So measure. What gets measured gets done. Jackie, what about you?
Well, that's part of mine, but I'd say leadership commitment is the single biggest priority, and that needs to include making ambitious public goals that are then publicly measured, good, bad, or indifferent.
Great. Leadership involvement. And Tiffany, what would you recommend?
I would recommend finding suppliers, diversifiers, as easy as going to Amazon Prime. Like, make it easy to search and find MBEs, WEBs, DOBs, and LGBTEs immediately. That way you can alleviate that excuse, and supplier.io can help with that.
Wonderful. Thank you. I love that. So it should become let's have something that's as easy as a Google to actually do that, so that we don't hear there aren't anybody, we can't find anybody, which is a common refrain that we hear, not only from a supply chain perspective, but also from a people perspective. So some of the key takeaways that I have had today, thank you so much to this esteemed panel, and we're going to be going to the questions, but some of the things that I pointed out include, I've written down include show the performance. I love what you said, Tiffany, around diverse business does not equal small business. So remember that it could be a larger organization. Let's migrate away from this concept that we're doing this for charity, that we're doing this to give back. No, it's actually a good business practice. We need to ensure that that is the message. We're doing this so that we as organizations actually perform better, not that we give back to underrepresented communities. Start with the baseline, use a search engine, go beyond a broad base, look at a broad base, go beyond what we may typically look at, which is IT and marketing. There's a lot more diverse suppliers out there beyond IT and marketing, and then ensure that we get buy-in at the top. So there are definitely a lot of key takeaways that I've just learned, and hopefully the folks on this call have learned also, but I'm going to actually turn it over to my colleague, Bev, because we've got a lot of questions in the chat.
There are so many questions and acknowledgement for our panelists. So thank you all for speaking about your expertise and your experience with supply diversity. And I'm just it's kind of like a circus. I'm juggling a few things and I'm like, wait, we've talked about that. So I'm actually going to acknowledge that some of the questions have already been answered organically. And I love that when that happens. But I pulled out a few of them. So here's one that comes from Pamela. What primary industries are we seeing a lack of diverse vendors? And Eileen, you might be able to speak to this too, being where you're at in your position. So I'd love to hear from any of you.
Yeah, I will say we've actually done a search around that, and believe it or not, the technology and engineering kind of industries that had more, less diverse, certified diverse suppliers. That doesn't mean, and legal. These were kind of the top three industries that we saw that was not as many as diverse suppliers that we would have liked to see. But you know what? This is another interesting thing. I'll do a quick call out. There are maybe diverse suppliers that have not gotten their certification yet either, right? And so we want to also emphasize that go get certified so it can be, available, through all the agencies that Meiko mentioned in the beginning. So that's another thing that we're trying to do. Speaking of trying to help obviously this field specifically is getting those organizations, get them certified, and encourage them to do that so we can have more access to them.
That is a fantastic segue to actually another question. And I think this may be very practical, this question, but Jackie made mention earlier too of certifications and how important that is. Brian Hanna asked, how do you take into consideration diverse suppliers who are not certified? Or what's the best way to try to convince these companies to get certified? Or maybe even what's the first step?
Well, maybe I can take a shot at that.
Sure.
When we began our program, we were very nascent. And what we decided is we're talking to these suppliers who we think should be certified, and they're saying it's too bureaucratic. We don't know how to do it. It's kind of a problem. I think things have improved, but we said, well, we're going to give you some white glove support. Initially, we just reached out and said, okay, we're going to help you fill this out. We're going to help you navigate the bureaucracy. If it's a matter, in some cases of a financial challenge, we'll give you a credit to go do this. And then we also tried to do a lot of matchmaking with some of the more receptive internal partners to have them talk about what are the benefits that they would see for, if they were to become certified, what opportunities were available to them that otherwise would not be available. So it's kind of educating, assisting, helping people to break through some obstacles that perhaps they aren't really quite ready to address on their own.
Do I hear you say that you're coaching them?
Yes.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that, Jackie. Anyone else want to chime in on that question?
Well, we started accepting self-certifications a few years ago. And I saw a question around small business. We also started to include small business as a separate area outside of diversity, but within the supply diversity program, considering that it doesn't necessarily mean a diverse person is running the business. And we give them a certain amount of time to acquire their third-party certification after being self-certified at TIAA. And we do offer, very much like Jackie is saying about Intel, we offer a white glove style service. We're like, okay, if it's challenging, if it's cumbersome, because it is, it's cumbersome. All the things like Meiko was saying that you have to do, this is not really at the top of the priorities list. And I realized in the beginning of my my career in supply diversity these last couple of years that I wasn't getting the greatest response by leading with development opportunities via the certification agencies. When I did get a better response, and frankly, a proper response in my opinion, is when I led with the networking and exposure opportunities. And that's how we get them over the hump.
Yeah, I will just add one thing to that. As much as we're talking about getting these suppliers to get their certification, we're also consulting around helping the companies on the other hand. Speaking of Jackie's internal barrier, the barriers for them to get certification, we're actually telling companies also and saying, hey, you need to work to remove those internal barriers also for these diverse suppliers, like difficult insurance requirements, payment terms, that is really make it hard for small and diverse companies to do business with them. So it's kind of like both of the parties, right? Both the companies as well as the diverse suppliers are really having to work together to make this really happen.
Yeah, that's a great point. And we did, particularly in some of the challenging times early in the pandemic, but even prior, help people understand tools that they could use to accelerate the payments, be earlier than our normal payment terms, but still meeting the expectations of our internal days payable outstanding. So, giving people tools and mechanisms that simplify their life, as an outward thing we can do for the diverse suppliers is, it makes a difference in their ability to work with us.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And if somebody has missed it, we dropped in the link for the blog. That might be a first step, supplier.io/blog. But these questions are also speaking to what you're speaking to, Jackie, which is where can I start to get educated? What are the resources? Where are the courses? So if you have any resources you want to share too, please let us know. There's another question, but we have 2 minutes left. And I feel like if I ask, it's so big, but I'm going to ask it. You know what? Today's your lucky day. We're going big. So whereas the US, and maybe I can just hear from one, maybe just one of you, whereas the US has very specific definitions for what is a diverse business, what trends are you seeing outside of the US, if at all? Jackie.
Yes, I'm sorry. I want to say that India is the world's 5th largest economy and growing, and yet it ranks just above Syria, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan in terms of economic opportunities for women. And so based on the significance of that gap, this is an area where we are trying to foster more opportunities for women in a region that we think is ripe for more STEM work and where the opportunity is big. We have other gaps that we've identified in European economies, and we try to work with their definitions. But we also highlight those that we think are important and in need of attention.
Thank you. All right, I'm passing it to you, Meiko, but there is rapid fire questions. I just think this is a fantastic conversation and we have to keep it going. We will share contact information as well, but I'm going to pass it to you, Meiko, to close this out.
Thank you so much, Bev. Again, we recognize that we weren't able to answer all the questions because we could spend a lot more than an hour talking about this topic, which is incredibly important. So I wanted to simply end with a thank you. Thank you, Eileen. Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Tiffany. Thank you for the work that you're doing within your respective organizations. To your point, Jackie, you are actually making an impact for every single person. And so thank you for the passion that you all bring to the table and the change that you're creating every single day. We will be sending out a copy of this in case anybody's interested in seeing that. If you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to contact us. You can contact us at info@ina.com and we can pass along messages to our esteemed panelists, or we might be able to address some of these questions ourselves. So with that, our next webinar is going to be in September, and the topic is going to be around pay equity. And so it's another topic that's of great interest to us as an organization. We wish you all the best. Again, thank you so much to the panelists, and we hope everyone remains safe and well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Meiko.